It was a hot Saturday afternoon in late July of 2018 in Somerset, Kentucky. The sun was blazing over the hills. The smell of grilled burgers filled the backyard, and kids were laughing as they ran around the swing set. But for Emily, that family barbecue felt more like a trap than a celebration. Emily stood quietly near the picnic table, wearing a flowy blue dress that she hoped would hide her curves. At 278 pounds, she had always felt like the odd one out. But today, the weight on her heart was heavier than any number on a scale. She was trying to enjoy the day, smiling politely, avoiding the mirror-like glances from her in-laws, especially Judith. Judith, her mother-in-law, was sharp-tongued, always perfectly dressed, and never missed a moment to remind Emily of her size. For years, she had dropped cruel comments dressed as advice. Maybe skip dessert, dear, or have you ever considered portion control? But that afternoon, in front of the entire family, Judith went too far. "Y'all," she shouted, holding up a paper plate with 3 ribs and some potato salad. "This is what Emily calls a light lunch. No wonder we can't see the porch from behind her." Laughter erupted. Even Emily's husband, Nate, gave a nervous chuckle and looked away. Emily froze. Her throat tightened. It felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the summer air. She tried to speak, but no words came. Judith wasn't done. Bless her heart, she still thinks money and prosperity come to folks who don't have control over their own health. Honey, let me tell you, no man gets wealthy dragging that kind of weight around. Emily slowly backed away, her hands trembling. She turned and walked into the house, the laughter still ringing in her ears. In the bathroom, she locked the door and stared at her reflection. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glassy. Her chest rose and fell with every heavy breath. That wasn't just embarrassment. It was rage, hurt, shame, and something new: resolve. For years, she had accepted this. She had convinced herself that being kind was more important than standing up for herself, that her value wasn't measured by pounds or looks or wealth. But that day, Judith stripped her of her dignity in a single sentence. And something in Emily snapped. She sat on the edge of the tub, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "This ends now." That night, Emily didn't cry. She didn't vent to Nate. She didn't argue or plead or explain. She just sat on her porch in silence, listening to the hum of crickets, and planned. Not revenge. Not yet. But change. Real, permanent, powerful change. She wasn't going to chase validation anymore. She was going to rebuild everything from the ground up. Her health, her strength, her values, her entire life. And one day, she promised herself, Judith would see her again. Not as the same woman she ridiculed, but as a woman of wealth, of health, of grace, of quiet, undeniable power. Emily didn't know how, but she knew why, and that was enough. Emily didn't wake up the next morning with some magical plan. There was no dramatic speech, no workout montage, no applause, just quiet, stillness, and a little ache in her chest that wouldn't go away. It was Sunday, the 29th of July, and Somerset was already hot by 7 in the morning. The sun spilled through the blinds as Emily sat on her kitchen counter, sipping coffee in silence. Nate was still asleep. The house smelled like charcoal and cheap coleslaw from the day before. Her body felt heavy, sore, not just from her weight, but from holding in years of pain. She looked at the fridge. It was covered in photos, her wedding day, vacations, birthdays, but not one of them made her smile. Not anymore. Because behind every picture, she remembered the little jabs. The way Judith would whisper to Nate, "She's sweet, but Lord, don't let her near the buffet again." Or how, during their honeymoon, she caught Judith sending a text to one of her friends. He married the marshmallow. Emily stood up and walked to the bathroom. She didn't step on the scale. She just stared in the mirror again. "I don't hate you," she whispered to her reflection, "but I'm not going to protect you from the truth anymore." That afternoon, she grabbed a notebook from the junk drawer and wrote at the top, "My rebuild list." Underneath it, she started slow. Drink more water. Walk every morning. No more sodas. No more leftovers at midnight. Speak kindly to myself. Don't quit when it gets hard. It wasn't fancy. But it was hers. That evening, she walked a mile around the block. She wore an old hoodie and tried to ignore the sweat dripping down her back. Every step felt like she was dragging her old self behind her. But she did it. The next day, she did it again. And the next. By the second week of August, she had lost her first 7 pounds. She didn't tell anyone. Not even Nate, especially not Judith. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about her, about reclaiming her health, her power, her future. At night, she started watching videos about nutrition. She learned about values, not just moral ones, but food labels, ingredients, hidden sugars. She became obsessed with understanding what she had ignored for years. And the more she learned, the more she realized how little she had valued her own health before. It wasn't just about weight. It was about energy, about confidence, about walking into a room and not shrinking herself before someone else could do it for her. By September, her clothes were fitting looser. She had lost 18 pounds, and though the scale moved slowly, her mindset was racing ahead. She was up early, meal prepping, listening to audiobooks about money, prosperity, and self-worth. Words that used to feel like they belonged to someone else, rich folks, skinny women, perfect mothers, they started to feel like hers. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, she found an old whiteboard Nate had bought years ago. She hung it in the laundry room and wrote across the top, "My wealth board." And beneath that, "Health is the first wealth. Values are the second. Money will follow." She smiled to herself. Not because she believed she was rich, but because, for the first time in her life, she believed she could be. Every day was hard. There were slip-ups, moments when she almost gave up. When Nate didn't notice, or worse, when he seemed annoyed she was changing. But she didn't stop. Because Judith's voice still echoed in her mind. "You'll never be worthy." And Emily's heart had only one answer now. Watch me. By mid-October of 2018, the leaves in Somerset had turned deep red and golden brown, blanketing the sidewalks like nature's farewell letter to summer. Emily had now lost 27 pounds. Her face looked lighter, her eyes brighter, but what changed most couldn't be seen in a mirror. She had started journaling every night, not just food or calories, but thoughts, emotions, patterns. Every time she felt tempted to give up, she wrote down her why. Every time Judith's voice echoed in her mind, she wrote a new truth over it. Her strength wasn't loud, but it was growing roots. But not everyone was cheering her on. Nate, her husband, had grown quieter. He still left for work every morning at 7:30, still ate dinner in front of the TV, still asked about bills. But he didn't ask about her. Not her walks, not her meals, not the weight she was dropping week by week. One night, she asked gently, "Do you notice anything different?" He barely looked up from his plate. "You cook less pasta now, I guess?" That was it. Emily didn't argue, but something shifted. She realized she had always waited for his approval, his praise, as if her health, her goals, her happiness needed his permission. That night, as she folded laundry in silence, she made a new rule. No more shrinking for people who refuse to grow. She posted it on her whiteboard the next morning, right below "Values over validation." Despite Nate's silence, Emily kept going. She started following women online who talked openly about rebuilding their lives, financially, emotionally, physically. One of them, a woman from Nashville, shared a video titled, "Money is just a mirror. Fix your self-worth and wealth follows." That hit hard. Emily began making small but serious changes. She set up a savings account in her own name. Just $50 a week. She called it her prosperity jar, and every deposit felt like a quiet rebellion. A promise to herself. That money wasn't just for surviving, it was for thriving, for choices, for power. And it wasn't just her wallet growing. Her meals were colorful and clean. She added strength training 3 times a week, using canned beans as weights until she could afford dumbbells. Her neighbors started to wave more often. The cashier at the local grocery store told her she looked fresh. For the first time, Emily felt seen, and not because of her size, but her energy. Still, Judith lingered like a shadow. One Sunday morning, Judith dropped by unannounced. Nate was out, and Emily opened the door in leggings and a sports bra, sweat still glistening from her workout. Judith's eyes scanned her from head to toe. Well, looks like someone finally got tired of being the elephant in the room. Emily didn't flinch. She stepped aside, calm as ever. "You want coffee, Judith?" Judith blinked, surprised. "Sure," she muttered, stepping in. As Emily poured the coffee, she spoke, slowly, evenly. "I'm changing some things in my life, Judith. Things that matter. Health, wealth, values. I'm not chasing your approval anymore." Judith scoffed, setting her purse down. "This ain't about me." Emily smiled, her voice steady. "Exactly." For the first time, Judith didn't have a comeback. Emily didn't need her to. She knew now that silence could be power, too. And while Judith had once tried to define her worth, Emily was rewriting the definition. 1 pound, 1 choice, 1 quiet act of power at a time. By Halloween, she was down 35 pounds. But more than that, she had finally stepped into her own life. Thanksgiving in Kentucky hit different that year. It was Thursday, the 22nd of November, and the air in Somerset had a cold bite to it. Families filled their homes with laughter, warmth, and the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes. But inside Emily's house, things were starting to cool in a different way. By then, she had lost nearly 45 pounds. Her face had a soft glow, her steps felt lighter, and her spirit had more fire than ever. But while Emily was rising, her marriage was slipping through cracks neither she nor Nate wanted to patch anymore. They barely spoke. Nate would come home, eat dinner in silence, scroll through his phone, and disappear into bed. He never asked her about the meals she carefully prepared, filled with fresh vegetables and lean protein. He didn't compliment her new energy or the way her clothes fit differently. He just seemed detached. That night, after dinner, Emily stood in the kitchen, wiping down the counter while Nate watched a football game. She took a breath and said quietly, "Nate, can we talk?" He didn't even turn around. "About what?" Emily walked closer, her voice steady but soft. "About us. About how things feel different. Cold." He muted the TV. "You're the one changing," he said. "You eat different, act different, think you're better than the rest of us now?" That hit like a slap. "I'm not trying to be better than anyone," Emily replied. "I'm trying to be better than I was." He scoffed. "Well, maybe I liked you the way you were." She stared at him, that old ache rising again. But this time it didn't drown her. "Did you? Or did you just like that I didn't ask for more?" Silence. That night she cried in the shower, not because she was broken, but because she was breaking free. There's a grief that comes with growth, and Emily was starting to feel it deep in her bones. but she didn't stop. The next morning, she woke up early, wrapped herself in her thickest hoodie, and jogged for 2 miles. The frost stung her face, but she welcomed the cold. It reminded her she was alive, moving, becoming. Over the next few weeks, she leaned harder into her rebuild. She started attending weekend seminars online about personal finance. She learned about budgeting, investments, side hustles, not because she was planning to leave, but because she needed to know she could stand on her own. She opened a second account, started freelancing small design jobs, $50 here, $100 there. Her prosperity fund began to grow. Money wasn't the goal. It was the tool, the symbol that she was no longer waiting on Nate or Judith or anyone else to give her permission to live a life of value and wealth. By mid-December, she had lost 52 pounds. Her skin was clearer. Her back didn't ache when she bent to tie her shoes. And for the first time in over a decade, she walked into a boutique and bought a dress off the rack. It was a deep burgundy wrap dress. Not tight, not baggy, just right. As she looked in the mirror inside that small shop on Main Street, she smiled. Not because she was finally thin, but because she saw a woman with strength, grace, and rising self-worth. That same week, Judith called to invite them to her Christmas dinner. "Bring something low-fat," she said with a snort. "Wouldn't want to ruin your fancy new health plan." Emily smiled. "I'll bring what feeds the soul, Judith." Judith didn't catch the tone, but Emily meant every word. Her soul was starving no more. Christmas morning in Somerset brought a thin layer of frost and the kind of stillness that made the whole town feel like it had paused to breathe. Emily lit a candle on her kitchen table, soft cinnamon scent filling the room. It was December 25th, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel heavy with dread. She had lost 61 pounds by then. Her skin glowed. Her energy was different, focused, calm. She slipped into the burgundy wrap dress she had bought weeks earlier. It hugged her in all the right places. Not tight, just present. Just proud. Nate hadn't said much all morning. He helped load the casserole into the car but didn't comment on how she looked. Didn't ask how she felt. He had grown quieter with every pound she lost. Maybe it was insecurity, maybe resentment. Emily had stopped trying to decode it. At noon sharp, they arrived at Judith's house. Judith opened the door wearing her usual Christmas red blazer and a sharp smile. "Well, don't you look different?" she said, eyeing Emily up and down. "Guess kale and self-help books paid off." Emily smiled gently. "Good to see you too, Judith." Inside, the house looked like it always did. Perfect. Lights strung with precision, white tablecloths, expensive glassware, and not a thing out of place. Except this year, Emily wasn't there to shrink into a corner. She stood tall, shoulders back, and greeted everyone with a confidence that unsettled more than a few. Dinner was awkward. Judith made a point of passing the butter rolls toward Emily. "One won't hurt," she teased. "You don't want to get too obsessed with all that health stuff." Emily placed her fork down, looked her mother-in-law in the eyes, and said gently, "I'm building a life that's rich in health, Judith. Not just skinny. There's a difference." The room went quiet for a moment. Nate glanced up, then quickly looked back at his plate. Later that night, as they were leaving, Judith pulled Emily aside. "You've changed." Emily nodded. "I had to. I got tired of confusing comfort with love." Judith blinked. "I was just trying to help you, you know? Push you to be your best." "No," Emily said softly. "You were trying to keep me small, but I've outgrown that now." She didn't wait for a reply. Back at home, Emily sat by the window, a hot cup of tea in her hands. Nate walked in, leaned against the wall, and spoke without looking at her. You really told her off today." "I told the truth," Emily replied. He sighed. "You're not the same person I married." Emily looked out the window, watching snow begin to fall. "I know." He didn't respond. The silence stretched. She whispered, "I still love who I am, do you?" He didn't answer. And in that silence, Emily realized something. Love built on silence, resentment, and convenience wasn't love. It was habit. That night, while he slept, she logged into her prosperity fund account. She had saved over $800. Small, maybe, but it was hers. Built with grit, long walks, side hustles, and self-worth. She wrote on her whiteboard, "Wealth isn't the size of your house, it's the strength of your soul." As the snow piled up outside, Emily sat on the floor beside her board, wrapped in a blanket of peace. There was still pain, but also, for the first time in her adult life, there was power. By the second week of January, the gray skies over Somerset hung heavy, like a curtain waiting to be pulled back on something new. Emily stood in the driveway with her hands in her pockets, watching her breath rise into the winter air. It was Monday, the 7th of January, and she had just returned from her first solo road trip. Just her, a rented compact car, a travel mug full of black coffee, and a stack of podcasts about personal growth, money management, and health. She'd driven 2 hours west to Louisville to attend a weekend wellness workshop she found online. It wasn't flashy, just a group of 20 women sitting in a rec center basement, sharing their stories of transformation. Some were recovering from illness, others from heartbreak. A few, like Emily, were rebuilding from emotional damage that had gone unnoticed for years. But when she stood up to speak, something in her voice surprised even her. "I used to think I had to earn love by being quiet, by being small. But I've learned that real love, healthy love, doesn't shrink you. It expands you." The room clapped. Some women teared up. By the time she returned to Somerset, Emily had made new contacts, exchanged emails, and signed up for an online business course. Not for a job, for a dream. One she didn't fully know how to name yet, but it involved helping other women like her reclaim their health, prosperity, and confidence. When she stepped back into the house, Nate barely looked up from the couch. "Where you been?" he asked. "Workshop," she answered, taking off her coat. "Personal growth and nutrition." He smirked. "Sounds like a scam to me." Emily paused, then nodded slowly. "Might have been, but I came home with more than I left with. That's worth something." Later that night, she opened her notebook and wrote 3 goals. Lose the next 30 lbs, launch my first online wellness program, reach $1,000 in my prosperity fund. By the end of January, she'd lost 68 pounds total. Her legs were stronger, her walks were longer, her mind sharper. She changed her grocery habits entirely. More whole foods, less processed junk. She started using cash for everything. No more credit card guilt. Judith called less now. But when she did, it always came with a dig. "You know, your voice sounds different lately," she said over the phone one Tuesday evening. "Almost like you think you're better than the rest of us now that you've lost some weight." Emily smiled. "I don't think I'm better, Judith. I just finally believe I'm enough." That silence on the other end said everything. One Friday morning, while doing laundry, Emily found a small box tucked under a pile of Nate's old t-shirts. Inside were receipts, hotel bookings, text printouts. Her stomach dropped. There it was, proof. He had been stepping out. With who, how long, why? None of that mattered now. What mattered was the truth. It had always been in the silence, in the shrinking, in the resentment that grew every time she grew stronger. When he came home that night, she didn't yell. didn't cry. "I found the box," she said plainly. He stood frozen. She looked him in the eye. "This isn't just your house. This is my life, and I'm not sharing it with someone who doesn't value loyalty." He tried to speak. She raised her hand gently. "Don't. This isn't a conversation. It's a choice, and I've made mine." That night, she slept in the guest room. The next morning, she called a lawyer. She didn't hate Nate, but she loved herself more. For the first time in her life, Emily chose herself fully. No guilt, no fear, just truth. And from that truth came peace. By early April of 2019, Somerset was waking up from winter. Dogwoods bloomed along the sidewalks. The air smelled like rain and fresh soil, and Emily felt something inside her rising with the season. Not just hope, momentum. She had now lost 92 lbs. Her face was sharper, her waist slimmer, but the real change lived in her eyes. Calm, certain, unshaken. The divorce process moved slowly, the way small-town paperwork always does. Nate tried to argue, tried to guilt her, even tried to paint himself as the victim. But Emily stayed steady. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was done. One cool Saturday morning at 8:30, she met with her lawyer in a small brick office right off Main Street. They discussed assets, debts, and how to divide everything fairly. Emily kept her voice soft but firm. "I don't want extra money from him," she said. "Just what's right. My prosperity will come from my own work." The lawyer nodded with respect. By the first week of May, the divorce was finalized. She walked out of the courthouse in a simple blue dress, breathing in the warm Kentucky air, free for the first time since she was 20 years old. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. Instead, she drove straight to Lake Cumberland, parked her car near the docks, and sat on a bench overlooking the water. Fishermen shouted in the distance. Boats hummed through the waves. The wind brushed her hair back as if the whole world was clearing space for her new life. She whispered, "I made it." And she had. At home, she poured herself a glass of lemon water, opened her notebook, and began building the next phase of her life. Her online wellness program, Rebuild from the Inside Out, was finally ready. She launched it on a quiet Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, her hands trembling as she clicked publish. By the next morning, she had 80 sign-ups. By the end of the week, over 200. Women from Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana, some from her own hometown, wrote emails thanking her for sharing her truth. They talked about emotional pain, lost confidence, weight they carried in both body and soul. Emily responded to every single one. Not because she had to, but because values mattered to her now. Real wealth came from building others up, not tearing them down the way Judith once did. As summer rolled in, the program grew. Sponsors reached out. A wellness brand offered her a partnership. Her prosperity fund, once a small jar with hopeful dollar bills, was now an account with over $12,000 in it. Not lottery money, not handouts, earned money, clean money. Money built with health, purpose, and self-worth. One humid evening in late June, Emily walked into a gym in Somerset, the same gym she once avoided like a curse. But now she entered with her head high. The owner, a friendly man named Carl, smiled at her. "You're the lady everyone's talking about. You've become kind of a local hero." Emily laughed softly. "Just trying to live right." Carl leaned forward. "Tell you what, you want to teach a weekly beginner's class here? I got the space. You've got the story." She hesitated, then smiled. "Yes, I'd love that." By the end of July, her class was full every week. Women of all ages came. Young moms, retirees, teachers, waitresses, each one hungry for a better life. Emily taught them about health, values, prosperity of the heart, and real wealth that starts from within. But by far the most shocking moment of that summer came on a Tuesday morning. Emily received a message from Judith. It said, "Call me, it's urgent." Her hands stilled. She hadn't spoken to Judith in months. She took a deep breath, then dialed. After 2 rings, Judith answered, her voice trembling. "Emily, I need your help." Emily sat down. What happened? Judith inhaled shakily. "My business, it's fallen apart. I made some bad money decisions. I'm losing everything. I don't know what to do." Emily closed her eyes. Fate was circling back. Judith, the woman who once mocked her for her weight, her health, her value, her worthiness of prosperity, was now drowning in the very thing she worshipped most: wealth, or the illusion of it. Emily spoke softly. "Judith, I'm sorry you're going through this." Silence. Then Judith whispered, Can I meet with you? Please." Emily looked out her window toward the bright Kentucky sky. "All right, Judith, we can talk." Her voice wasn't petty. It wasn't vengeful. It was steady, powerful, and ready. The tide had turned, and for the first time in her life, Judith was the one reaching upward. The sun was barely rising over Lake Cumberland when Emily stepped onto the deck of her new private yacht. It was Tuesday, the 20th of August, the air warm with a soft southern breeze. The sky was painted in pale oranges and golds, and the quiet ripple of water against the hull felt like applause from the universe itself. She had lost 110 LOBs by then. 110. Her body was strong, toned, and full of life. But her spirit was what had transformed the most. She was no longer the woman who hid behind folding chairs at barbecues or whispered apologies for taking up space. She moved like someone who valued her own breath, her own choices, her own future. And today, she was meeting Judith. Emily had invited her to the marina that morning, not out of revenge, but clarity, closure, and maybe a touch of poetic justice that life had wrapped up with a bow. At 9 o'clock sharp, Judith arrived. She walked slowly along the dock, wearing a faded blouse and carrying a purse far too worn for the woman who once bragged about her high-end handbags. Her hair was thinner, her face tired. The weight of failed investments, drained accounts, and her collapsing business hung on her like a wet coat. Judith stopped at the edge of the yacht, eyes wide. This is yours?" she asked, her voice cracking. Emily nodded. "All mine." Judith's lips parted as she took in the polished wood, the shining chrome, the white cushions glowing in the morning light. For a moment she looked like she might cry. "I don't understand," she whispered. How did you get the money for all this?" Emily stepped closer, her voice warm but grounded. "By rebuilding my life, by focusing on health, on values, on prosperity that comes from in here." She tapped her chest. "Not the kind that gets flashed around like costume jewelry." Judith blinked fast. I didn't think—" "You didn't think I was worthy," Emily finished softly. "I know." Judith swallowed. "Emily, I'm sorry. For all the things I said, I was cruel, I was proud. And now, I ain't got anything left. Not money, not wealth, not even health, if I'm honest." Emily looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who once laughed at her in front of a crowd now stood trembling on a dock, begging for guidance. "Judith," she said gently, "I didn't build this life to spite you. I built it to save myself." She paused. "But I'm willing to help you, if you come with honesty." Judith nodded, eyes glossy. "I'll try. God knows I need someone who understands." Emily offered her hand to help her step aboard. Judith hesitated. You sure you want me on this fancy thing, after everything? Emily smiled. A slow, calm smile that came from strength, not ego. Judith, this yacht isn't about luxury. It's a symbol, a reminder that even a woman who was once humiliated, dismissed, and made to feel worthless can rise into a life of true wealth. Judith's voice shook. And you forgive me? Emily let the breeze pass between them before responding. I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't a free pass, it's a path, and you've got to walk it. Judith stepped aboard. They sat on the deck, the sun warming their shoulders as Emily shared her story. Her routines, her discipline, her financial choices, her emotional healing, her growth. Judith listened, quiet and humbled, absorbing every word like medicine. After a long silence, Judith whispered, I judged you for your size. I judged you for being soft. But you're the strongest woman I've ever met. Emily nodded once, letting the truth settle. As the yacht drifted gently on the lake, she spoke the words she wished someone had told her long ago. Real prosperity is becoming the woman you were too scared to be. Judith lowered her head, ashamed, but also awakened. They stayed on the water for hours, not as enemies, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women who had finally seen the truth of one another. When Judith left, Emily stood at the helm of her yacht, watching the sun shimmer across the lake. She inhaled deeply, her heart full, not of revenge, but victory. A quiet, elegant victory. She had risen, she had rebuilt, she had transformed. And in the end, the world had bowed to her strength without her ever raising her voice.